Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cannabis Extraction Thoughts and Considerations. We've got a pretty interesting group today. I'm going to go right on into just quickly introducing myself. Seems kind of strange calling myself part of the interesting group, but oh well. My name is Dan Gustafik. I'm the founder of Hybrid Tech. We're an engineering design group working in the cannabis sector. Personally, I've been working in the sector about 20 years. Many of our crews have been working for a couple years, 6, 7, 8, depends on the individual. We've got about 2 million square feet of facilities completed across the US, Canada, and we're currently focused mostly on extraction projects, which is why we're part of this webinar. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Gene.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gene Galyuk. I'm a co-founder here at Kaplan Systems. I have been in cannabis extraction for approximately 10 years at this point. Started with laboratories, building out facilities, toll processing, working with brands. The Bloom brand primarily is an in-house brand that Kaplan Labs manufactures and manufactures on all Kaplan Systems equipment. So yeah, that's me and that's my story.
Excellent. We got Chris as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Salinas, the Chief Operating Officer for Kaplan Systems. I bring 20 years of manufacturing experience to Kaplan. My background has been obviously in manufacturing, but also in some key factors of ISO compliance, ISO integration. Now we're getting into, the whole GMP compliance, bringing also some lean manufacturing tools to the table as well. It's all about, making sure that we're as efficient as a manufacturer in turn to make sure that we're giving quality products to our customers.
Great.
Also, I see that you're Six Sigma green belt there. Yes. That is quite interesting. We have a bunch of Six Sigma individuals as well.
Great.
We can explain that to the less geeky members of the audience at a later point in time if that's of interest. All right. Moving on to the extraction technologies. We're basically just kind of covering the general overview of differing systems. Most of you, of course, are aware there's multiple different ways to extract medium. Actually, since the first one is CO2, we'll talk a little bit about that, but then I want to hand that right over for ethanol systems. CO2 is a pretty standard process using supercritical fluid, high pressure systems, pressure vessels, all that fun stuff to actually then obviously create, crude product. The throughput on it seems to be relatively good. Individuals like, Dr. McKay and others have told me that the primary reason this method is deployed is repeatability. It doesn't have the actually highest throughput, but it's an extremely repeatable process and obviously very established technology. So there's a lot of people deploying that. And then you guys want to take it away on ethanol?
Sure. So, obviously we specialize in ethanol extraction. We hold a patented process for the systems that we put out. Obviously, we focus primarily on cold ethanol extraction. And what we've discovered is compared to CO2, the hydrocarbon or the pressing technologies out there, cold ethanol is the only means to receive a fully de-waxed extract. So in turn, we are capable of producing a very high purity extract with minimal post-processing, minimal filtration, just real basic stuff for like small particulate plant matter that may come in. So when we talk about, let's say, supercritical CO2, it's very repeatable, but produces an extremely waxy crude, sometimes upwards of 30% fats and lipids. And so butane and hydrocarbon has a similar side effect. There's some co-extractable lipids that do come out. It's not as drastic as the supercritical CO2, but if one is looking for an ultra pure crude, then one must winterize and filter the lipids. When we talk about pressing has been coming up also, especially for the hemp industry, because of the high throughput. But with pressing technologies, it's so aggressive as far as the way the process interacts with the plant material that you pretty much extract every single thing out of the plant material, minus the fiber. And the challenges with that is that you can, it's pretty relatively simple to winterize waxes out, but the saccharins and the pigments and all of that kind of stuff that come out in these aggressive processes, they're very difficult to deal with. And in turn, achieving a pure CBD isolate is very difficult without having to do substantial filtration. And that usually involves bentonite, carbon scrubbing, plate filtration. So it's a very dirty and very tedious process, even though the pressing extraction process is relatively high throughput, probably one of the highest throughput out there on the market. So
it's kind of hard to beat a rosin press with a giant hydraulic head, since it's just, well, a hydraulic head and a press that squishes everything out.
Well, actually, the methodology with the pressing is more of like a screw press assembly. So just envision like a giant juicer. It's a screw press that forces the material up against the deadhead, and it just squeezes literally every single thing out of that plant material. So the process would be, you would soak this material in either heptane, hexane, ethanol, whatever solvent you can get your hands on that's, I guess, kosher for your process, and then you run it through this juicer. And that.
Okay. So this is a little different than the traditional rosin press methods of old. This is a little more advanced version where they're actually running some solvent, and they're also, of course, twisting a screw. I actually have not seen that very often. We tend to only see like the rosin presses because people, can't deploy like a full ethanol process, and they need to deploy some smaller, cheaper system, temporarily.
Yeah, but that's the rosin pressing, and I think that's a very kind of connoisseurish market. I don't think it's a very scalable solution for like mass extraction. There's definitely not something that like extraction facilities utilize as their primary source of extracting oil out of a plant material. I think the more realistic now, and what we've been seeing more and more of is, a lot of people turning towards the cold ethanol. It's scalable. There's less restrictions as far as the zoning and the flammability, right? And so we kind of have that on the next slide, if you can take us there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then one quick thing about the hydrocarbon. We can talk about that later, about the flammability. All right, challenges.
So obviously, we touched a little bit about that on the first slide, right? The challenges. So CO2, make sure that you have proper procedures for getting your wax out. And again, this will very, very depend on what is the end goal and what is the end product a manufacturer or processing facility is looking to produce, right? So I think it's very important for entrepreneurs and builders to first identify what is it exactly that they want to produce in their facility. And are they going to have an in-house brand? Is it going to be topicals? Is it going to be edibles? Is it going to be distillate or isolate? Because that will greatly affect the direction in which you should move when choosing extraction equipment. If producing, or if the model of a company is to produce, let's say, isolate for bulk sales, then the considerations of the filtration, the winterization, all of that have to go into play, because the more constituents you have in your crude oil, the more you're going to have to do to that crude oil in order to get a nice good yield on your isolate or even your distillate. But let's just say we have different clients, and some of them produce topicals or tinctures that are oil-based sublingual tinctures, to where a little bit of fat in the crude oil doesn't really make a difference. And so I think it's for anybody listening, first identify what is it that you want to produce. I understand whether fats or other constituents, sugars, are going to be a problem for your end product, and then based on that, look at technologies that you want to employ in your facility, right? So that'll cover filtration and winterization. So with ethanol, obviously, higher throughput, but you have that, you have to deal with getting the solvent out of your crude oil, out of your tincture. So evaporation becomes an issue. That, evaporation takes a lot of power. You have to properly size equipment so, you don't bottleneck. With butane has, obviously the high flammability risks. Which also falls into the zoning, and then also into the C1 and D1 and C1 D2 compliances. So all hydrocarbons must adhere to a C1 D1 compliance, which in turn means very expensive rooms, very expensive explosion-proof components, which will chew up a little bit of capital on the front end. But overall, butane is relatively efficient. It's relatively easy to scale hydrocarbon extraction systems, but you have to understand that there is going to be some loops that you're going to have to jump through with your local municipality, with fire zoning, your fire suppression, and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Right. Well, actually, mainly it's control areas is the problem.
Correct.
So most of the time what happens there is there's only so many control areas per building. And I think most of when they see flammability, they don't understand the difference between, you know, this thing actually is more flammable than this. So ethanol is a type 2B solvent, and a lot of people don't realize that you have a certain allowance of type 2B solvents per building. So if you have a standard F1 zone building, you have 480 gallons of type 2B solvent per control area, and you get 4 control areas per floor. So you'd have, you know, a little over 1,000 gallons, best case scenario, on one floor with type 2B solvent. In a standard building that's not a high hazard building. But if you transition over to butane, you're going to see that cut less than half. And that's the problem, is because it's a gas, it's obviously going to be a lot more explosive. So based on the International Fire Code requirements, you're going to have a lot more restrictions to how you're storing it. You have to have gas cabinets that have intake filters, dedicated outtake exhaust. So a lot of people, when they see flammability, they just kind of gloss over because they don't realize the reason implementing that is going to be difficult until they start getting down the nitty gritty of, oh, I can have only 240 gallons versus a little over, a little under 2,000 gallons. It's a pretty, or pounds, excuse me, versus gallons. It's a pretty massive differential in how much solvent you can store on your site. And that, when I'm talking about zoning, what we're meaning is the building's usage being factory one usage allows you to have that certain threshold. Whereas if you can transition the building to a higher hazard, an H hazard, that's where you're able to then go to technically an unlimited amount of type 2B solvent. However, the weird thing is there's still a limit on gases. So even though you're in a high hazard building, you actually can't have an unlimited amount of butane within the H designation, which you can with ethanol. So there's a kind of a differentiation between them with how explosive something is.
Yeah.
And the other reason we have these separate is the C1D1 and C1D2. A lot of people think those are the exact same thing as control areas, which we discussed in flammability, but they're actually not. They're separate. One's from the electrical code, one's from the International Fire Code. And so the C1D1 is actually electrical code, and that's literally just very linear. The electrical code's pretty basic. It is stating that if it's open to the process at any point in time to the environment, it's a C1D1. If it's closed to the process, it's C1D2. And that's literally all that means. There's a lot of misconceptions about how that works. But the electrical boundaries generated by those devices cascade into the equipment around them. That's where a lot of people get caught up in the challenges.
Well, we see a lot of, I guess, misunderstandings that just generally happen between the fire inspectors and the fire marshals in particular, regions and municipalities. A lot of these cases that are going up are, like in a one-horse town somewhere in the boondocks where the fire marshal has never even heard of C1D1 or C1D2. And we really have to hold their hands. And I think it's very important, as the thoughts and considerations is entrepreneurs, they should most certainly get engineers on board like Dan that know exactly what they're doing, that can hold the hands of these unsophisticated inspectors for the process before the build out even begins.
That's actually, well, it's kind of well, thank you for that. But it's kind of one of those funny things that we have a whole process laid out precisely for that. Depends on where you're at, though. Like if you're in Colorado, they're just going to kick it up to the state review, even if you're in the sticks. And at state review level, they've seen extraction, so they're pretty comfortable. Washington, Oregon, same thing. Some places, though, like Kentucky's a great example. They don't seem to have as much concern about the facilities because they're comparing them to stills and other locations with large quantities of explosive material. So it really is a regional thing, which is kind of difficult to figure out who's going to be, again, apprehensive about it. But yeah, you have a whole system in place where they require certain documentation, and, you have to provide that documentation to make them comfortable with your facility in particular. And if they're not comfortable, they're of course never going to approve it, which you're never going to be able to, of course, build that. But you're right, there's inconsistencies in how they apply the code because there isn't much code. We have the NFPA 38 is the only written national code about cannabis and hemp, and it's just a couple pages. Yeah. It's really, really light. So they don't have a lot of, most of the time you have a whole code book you can pick up and reference, spirits manufacturing, hospitals, tons of code. Cannabis and hemp, you've got a couple pages. So it's really kind of a new market, and they're just rightfully nervous. The code book is how you cover your butt as a public official.
And yeah, when you have no code, you're pretty much left to your own devices trying to figure out, is this good, is this not? But again, heavily lean on your engineers, because this will make your process much faster. You'll save a lot of money on the back end when you're building out smoothly and everything's on schedule.
Excellent. Were you ready to move on past the challenges?
Yeah. Let's see what the next slide holds.
All right. Well, this is the 10 mistakes. So technically, these are kind of dovetailed together. I can actually go through these really quickly, since they're something that we've run onto on many, many projects. The number one item is a non-qualified process trained design group. Technically, we're not a process trained design group. We work with a ton of them. There's lots of brilliant process trained engineers. They have been instrumental in many projects in obviously importing the actual equipment appropriately into the plan. Without them, we've had some major problems, unless we have a manufacturer like yourself who is capable of actually delivering the entire process. If you can't deliver the entire process, you're going to need to actually start piecing out all the different components and creating an entire process train that gives you from grinding all the way to final product packaging. If that's not available, someone has to set all that up. And that can be a very laborious process. And if it's not done appropriately, we've had a lot of products not, of course, work because of that. Number two is just certification requirements not basically taken into the beginning. This is why part of the thing of this slide is, this presentation is GMP. If you have GMP requirements coming in, they need to be considered in the very beginning of the process. So you can actually do the quality by design methodology, which is where you're actually taking into account what certifications you need on the end in the very beginning. So now you go, oh, I know for a fact I need to have this level clean room right here. I know for a fact I need to actually have an airlock here. So you're understanding how you're containing your risk factors to maintain your GMP certification level when you're designing a facility from the very beginning. Number three, top 10 mistake is building anything while you're still in the phase of designing. This one is done by probably, I'd say 70% of our hemp clients have already violated this one, but actually, it's because the market's moving so fast.
Yeah, I just got back from a customer, and we were installing 2 systems there, and this is exactly what was happening. They were cutting drywall.
Oh yeah.
Boards, and it's going to be very expensive for them to redo things should they go for their GMP compliance further down the line, because they're probably not going to get certified with the build out that they're doing today. And it's very important.
Exactly.
You want to save a lot of money, a lot of time, because GMP will take a lot of time, will take a lot of money. And then, if you factor in that you're going to have to, fully rebuild your facility, or even minor changes to the facility while you're already in processing, you're already manufacturing goods, that's going to cut into your bottom line substantially, because you're going to have to stop the machines. You're going to have to take losses for months, because you won't be able to operate until that GMP comes through.
Yes. Now, the GMP is just one aspect. The other thing that we have that happens consistently is a client will plan for a certain type of process. They're going to do CO2 here, and then after CO2, they're going to do isolation, distillation, utilizing ethanol, and then all of a sudden they switch up the process, creating a completely new set of requirements, new components, new process chillers, all that fun stuff that's got to get landed somewhere, and they're in build mode. So now we have to redesign, and they have to basically put change orders down to their general contractors to actually get things moved around, costing a lot of time and money. Whereas if you would have actually just waited a little bit until everything was ironed out, obviously wouldn't have that issue. But yeah, that's a major one. We put these in order for a reason, is that those are kind of the big three. All right, so number 4 is pretty straightforward. Local community, you need to actually, of course, be in communication with them, and your permitting agency, also referred to as your authority having jurisdiction. It's really good to actually reach out to them before you start, and obviously check with them on considerations for the site in question, and of course starting to work with them early on so they understand your plan and what you're planning on doing. Number 5 is really straightforward. If you're trying to dodge any code, you are going to have problems. The fire marshal does visit these facilities on average once a year, sometimes as high as once every 6 months. They do bring your plans with them, and if anything looks like it's out of alignment, you have problems. So really good to not try to skirt the code in any way possible, which is kind of connected to number 6. We've had some clients who said, hey, this whole area here is going to be empty, and it turns out the area was not empty when they actually came through for inspections. It was actually filled or was in usage. That can be a major, major problem, not just for the design team, but for also, of course, the actual client, since now we're going to have to go through the plans review process on all these new components that were not listed, which a lot of those are, most of the time they're hiding them, tends to be for a reason. Changing any designs late in the engineering phase will create problems as well. Any sort of negative interactions, of course, with local inspectors is kind of can be I wouldn't say a death sentence, but can be a really very negative thing. And also lawyers do not help you as much as you'd think in this area. A lot of clients have lots of lawyers. The inspectors do not care about your lawyers. They're protected, being that they're public officials. And they have no problem red flagging your facility to hell and back, should you, of course, start to go toe-to-toe with them. So normally it's really a good plan to be very, very friendly and positive interactions with the inspectors. The last one is just not being responsive to the authority having jurisdiction. Any requests they have for documentation of any kind, just not responding to them will end up leading to, obviously, a project not being approved. So I just want to go through quickly. Those are the top 10 mistakes, and then we're going to transition right over into what is GMP, and obviously, of course, kind of the concept behind it is why you need it. So GMP is basically just good manufacturing processes. So it's a system of ensuring you have a consistent, repeatable results. And you'll see it throughout the entire facility, through all phases. It's basically a way for manufacturing products, and making sure that product is set to a certain standard consistently, over and over again, repeatable results. And that's basically the core of it. It's obviously protecting everyone involved to ensure that you actually have a quality product at the end, which is hence good manufacturing quality product seal. Here's what it covers. Obviously, it's basically everything in your entire facility, all the way from e-materials, raw intake, to all the way into packaging, and even, of course, more. So GMP does cover the entire scope of your facility in full. And obviously, you have to have GMP standards applied throughout the entire process as well. Here's a quick other variants of GMP. CGMP, which is current good manufacturing practices, GXP, good practices, GAP, and GACP, agricultural and collection practices. So these are just, again, yes, nuances. They're all very similar. And the thing is, once you actually have, obviously, one, you tend to be very easily able to acquire the documentation required to get the other one, with the exception of European EU GMP is a little bit different, since that's a different set of standards. But again, very similar. All right. Do you want to cover how you're achieving GMP compliance?
Yes. So I want to take one quick step back to like some of the mistakes. Recently, with the cannabis industry, pivoting so rapidly within the last, say, 6 months or so, we found out that there's so many obviously moving pieces. You have a list of like 10 things there, like big mistakes. I'm sure the list could go on and on and on for days. So what we've done with a lot of our customers is really try to basically at the inception of their phone call is to really create an education for them, to make sure they understand, all of the little nuances that come in relation to setting up a plant, or even, doing genetics when it comes down to seeds and whatnot. So, what we try to position ourselves is basically a seed to shelf kind of, position in from an educational standpoint. So in relation to like GMP, you know, we're just one small part of the whole GMP factor where, you know, obviously our equipment, but there's a lot of things that come around, you know, in doing so. You know, we're in the process of getting our IQs, which is our installation qualification. You know, some of you guys might be familiar with the whole IQ, OQ, PQs, and it's very important in getting that type of level of validation for a GMP certification in the lab. So we're taking our steps, you know, forward to make sure that we present a full package of these IQ and OQ packages to give to the customer. So they're that much further ahead than they were buying just a machine right off the shelf. But in addition to all that, you know, we have the level of that holistic approach that we could talk to them about, you know, compliances, talking with engineers, and we're partnering up with companies such as yourselves, you know, to really, you know, give us, because we don't want to claim that we're the experts in everything, but we're going to be your one-stop person, your project manager, your project lead, to really give you all the answers to the questions and lead the customers down the right direction that, you know, people should go down. So we found that it was very important in taking these steps towards the CGMP. Along with that, in parallel to that, you know, it all comes down to the QMS, you know, our quality management system that every company should have. You know, and our filing is going to go down to the ISO 9001. So we have a full complete QMS system today. We're currently compliant, and by the end of 2020, we'll be fully registered under the ISO 9001, along with, you know, making sure that we're falling under all the GMP good manufacturing practices. So again, guys, you know, anybody that's going into this realm of extraction or any type of thought of getting into, you know, utilizing the hemp or the cannabis, you know, make sure that we're partnering up with the right people. You know, you may get, you know, 4 or 5 different answers. You know, do your due diligence. You know, make sure that you're partnering up with the right person, and you know, and try to guide yourself through one holistic channel. Because, you know, dealing with 4 or 5 different companies, you know, 4 or 5 different approaches, 4 or 5 different engineers is just going to create havoc in the industry, and it's just very inefficient.
As for GMP, right, it's very important that the equipment be GMP certified as well, right? Otherwise,
that is correct.
Otherwise, you know, you're not going to be able to run it in a GMP facility. Now, how many GMP qualified extraction manufacturers are out there? Dan, have you run into any systems that are GMP outside of maybe like a Waters CO2 extraction system?
Yeah, multiples. Yeah, there's actually a bunch, and there's also quite a few that are currently going through the process, but it's a lengthy process. So, you know, it's not a massive list. SAR, Dosha, Process, Waters. I don't know about many others. It's actually a pretty short list. But I do know quite a few people who are currently going through it right now. But yes, it's a short list.
And honestly, it's you know, from the equipment manufacturer, the goal in CGMP is to make sure repeatability, right? And so, you know, there's a lot of data points within the machine that, you know, if we say that the 98.6 of cannabinoids is off by doing this process, well, it's repeatable. Also from cleanliness, you know, how do you get the machine back to its current original state? You know, and then that's where, like I mentioned earlier, that's where the IQ, OQ, PQs come into play to make sure that these packages are all, you know, per machine, per style, for those specific customers.
Well, could you go a little bit more detail about how one's achieving a GMP from a, you know, more general perspective? Because I mean, you went into some very specifics on the actual equipment itself, but from a more of a general perspective, how are they implementing that?
As the machine manufacturer, or more
as an entire processing facility? So
yeah,
the entire processing facility.
So as dealing with the whole processing facility, you know, there's you know, parameters that we need to stay in to make sure that, you know, you're understanding where your end result is. I mean, you know, dietary supplements, you know, so we want to get into pharma. Do we want to get into dietary supplements? You know, so once you start backwards, again, I like to take the approach of, okay, what's your end result when, you know, what your end product is going to be? And then we work backwards. So we set up the lab, you know, we work with gentlemen like yourselves that, you know, to really help design a proper facility, number one. Number two, when looking at extraction equipment, you know, there is a level of like I mentioned, you know, with the IQ, OQ, PQs to make sure that you have proper data validations. proper, utilizing the cleanliness, for i.e., like a CIP program, a CIP machine, to get the machine back to its current state. Because, controlling your material from the biomass all the way through your distillate, through every single step of the process is critical, because you got to manage data points. And then, just again, then dealing with just the product batch, dealing with like NCPs and dealing with the MMRs, making sure that you have a quality system in place to help handle, any type of non-conformities that may happen in your process. Having written procedures, written SOPs, making sure that everybody is following, the same path. So basically, it's just going, like we're talking about, going through the whole process of understanding it holistically. So again, I talked about, what's your end result, and then just working backwards, making sure you're partnering up with the right engineer,
so, right.
the right
so
design.
Mostly it's documentation, right? Is basically standard operating procedures for every single process that happens in the facility. So, first you have, extraction, and then what happens then, right? So whether, filtration or it's evaporation, each and every single process needs to go through a very substantial review.
A validation.
A validation,
right.
Right. And then once all of your processes are validated and they're confirmed to be repeatable, that's when you're getting one step closer to GMP.
Excellent.
All
right. Well, let's talk. Go ahead.
It could take some time. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just an easy task. I mean, just to become, ISO 9001 compliant, it takes about a whole year.
Yeah.
Just to make sure. It's all about full implementation. You start with your data point, you start with the design, you start with your infrastructure, and then you have to push it down to the individual that's operating on your manufacturing floor. I mean, it's as simple as pest control. I mean, some people, they negate that fact that, you got contaminants, you got airborne, contaminants, you got maybe potentially, depending on what area you're at. I mean, some of these farms may have airborne pesticides. Are you bringing in the proper air to circulate your facility? Things of that nature that some people don't realize, that, you may have a farm, your neighboring farm that's not really under the whole GHP for cultivation, and basically throwing pesticides where it's airborne. You bring that into your greenhouse, into your extraction lab or whatnot, and then now you're out of compliance. So it's all about just making sure that you have a level of validation. So if I put this biomass, I run it to these set points, I'm supposed to get a value of X every single time. And if all of a sudden, if there's something that's outside of your common cause, then you would then do like a non-conformity. You do it like an analysis or review to try to find, a corrective, like a CAPA, a corrective action, preventative action plan, to make sure that you correct your process. Because it's not just a, once you set it up, it's the end all. There's always going to be some level of evolution in any type of processes that are implemented, but it all revolves around, how do you validate your process?
Excellent. Okay. And if you guys are familiar with the quality by design methodology?
Yes, quality by design on the inception of doing any type of designs. And that's where you come into play, where you give the level of guidance for either designing the lab, even talking to work with manufacturers such as ourselves, make sure we're designing the machines accordingly to the GMP standard.
Well, it's also, the quality by design is basically looking at your end goal and then just planning towards it. So it can be as simple as just realizing you have a contamination in your process train at this point, and you're going to need to isolate that, whether that be through a isolation hood, walk-in style, or whether you're actually looking at building an actual room. Do you need an additional isolation? Is this an airborne pathogen? Do you need an airlock to actually contain that? So It's basically just looking through your whole process in the very beginning, with, of course, the SOPs in hand, and then looking for holes where you can actually have contamination. And then from there, you actually are now designing new chambers and systems to obviously mitigate that potential risk factor, so you can actually get, again, that stability moving forward. And that's really all quality by design is. GMP relation towards cannabis and hemp. You guys want to cover that a little bit? What that means for your abilities to export and all that fun stuff?
Well, we haven't dealt very much in the EU side. We are working towards, becoming compliant in Canada, because right now, there's something up in Canada where they have like a CRN certification when it relates to machinery. So what we have, looked at from our designs on our end, we make sure our vessels do not go past a 15 PSI marker. And this helps us stay below the CRN regulation that Canada requires. Talking with other, people like in New Zealand or whatnot, this also comes into play as well. They're looking at pressures and the vessel capacity and vessel ratings is crucial, because they're obviously looking at from the safety of the end user for their machines.
Well, if you're over 15, you also have to be ASME approved. So it could be a stamped pressure vessel. So there's another threshold that you're trying to, you're avoiding without having that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So in relation, again, all this stuff, again, we're not claiming to be the experts, but, we do partner up with the right individuals to make sure that we bring the right players to the table. We don't want to, lead, anybody the wrong direction. We try to understand the fundamentals of it, the basics of how to get to the GMP, but, we do have consultants that we work with closely to make sure that we give the right answers to our customers.
And I think in cannabis, in hemp, we already see manufacturers that are building out to GMP. With cannabis, I don't think that cannabis is going to be affected by GMP regulations until it deschedules.
Only one state, Colorado.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, Colorado is the only state on the cannabis market that it has implemented a GMP third-party requirement for edibles. That's just Colorado. Yeah. But so far, what's happened is every state that's required, or one of the the main states that have, I guess, I don't know, flagship states, whatever you want to call them. Colorado, Washington, maybe Oregon, depends on how you slice it. But a lot of those states, it seems like whoever moves first, we do see that those regulations tend to cascade towards the other states. So there is a lot of people talking about how potentially GMP will start to actually be implemented in other states. But again, that has not happened, just Colorado on the cannabis market.
Yeah. And I think hemp is going to be first to win that race. I mean, obviously, it's regulated federally. And with all things federal, the highest of quality must be achieved,
right.
Achieved and maintained. So I don't have too much information on it, but I firmly believe that until there is a descheduling of cannabis, then cannabis will be flying under the radar of the GMP.
True, but they're still going to be held to a level of standard for pesticides, heavy metals, things of that nature. The same thing that cannabis is held to.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as if like for instance, we're here in California, we're a cannabis processor ourselves. I mean, as a sister company, the BPC regulations here, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, they're very stringent, and it's not quite GMP, but you might as well be with how everything is regulated here in California, and I'm sure like that in all the other states.
Yeah, and the GMP is just basically export requirements. So certain countries, obviously, you have to have European Union GMP certification to actually export towards that country. And this is mainly, Germany. There's a lot of countries in the European Union, obviously, who are requiring that. So that's just if you're planning on obviously selling bulk to other countries. But in the interest of time, we're just moving on for, planning for GMP, obviously the next piece we're talking about, and some potential pitfalls that people run into. It's pretty straightforward. The pitfalls, we've already kind of covered some of them earlier. The design obviously is not having all ventilation requirements taken into account, especially when you have, of course, a lot of process solvents facility. Some gases are, yes, some things float, some things sink. So depending upon how the facility is designed and what actually you're using as far as solvents go, there's differing design methodologies for each one. Building electrical fire codes, pretty straightforward. Any sort of deviation in this area is the biggest one where you can actually get the entire facility shut down. So that's obviously one that you're going to easily avoid if you actually have a team that's banging on top of applying all the local requirements and also state requirements. Changing regulations, that's pretty consistent. We have noticed that there is new regulations coming out, sometimes weekly, daily, state regulations on top of regulation from the building codes or departments. So depending upon what market you're in, this one can be a pretty tricky one. I won't give a ton of examples since we have 9 zillion of them, but we have had legislation come out while we're working on a facility that we had to deploy immediately on that facility, which created a much higher requirement for working on everything, and also, of course, just a lot higher safety levels, which was actually positive in the end, but the client was extremely unhappy because they were about to get approval. Here's some quick examples of like GMP, what not to do. Yep, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask you one question? So, one thing that I have seen that a lot of people miss is the OSHA regulations, making sure that you have your proper AIP, within, your action plan, your safety plan within the facilities. Where, people don't have proper.
Extremely common to forget that.
Like hazardous communications, within their facility. Make sure that the people understand, what happens when you have a spill. What happens if all of a sudden, there was an issue. What happens if there was a fire. Like all the what if scenarios where a lot of people get focused on the SOPs and machinery and the build out, but they forget to set up that procedure for the actual employees itself.
Oh yeah, we'll be quick to.
Yeah, very common.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so eye wash stations, things like that, follow rip systems when you're above 6 feet, all those little items. If you have a good design team, they'll tend to bring those out. And we obviously have to have signage on every single door where we have hazards present, but really the SOPs have to actually deal with each one of the OSHA requirements as well. And a lot of people do skip over those because they're just less commonly, thought of, I think. A lot of people are thinking more, again, like the process itself rather than what happens if I spill some ethanol in my eye. And how do I get it out? Or what happens if I spill a bunch of ethanol on the ground? Or if it's slurry, what if I spill a bunch of slurry on the ground? Most jurisdictions require us to do a spill control plan of some kind. Remember the Bureau of Environmental Health or the whatever equivalent just won't let you get through plan review without submitting some pretty aggressive spill control plan in case you do have a spill. They certainly don't want you discharging that.
Right.
Here's a quick example, which we're picking on here a little bit about a place that unfortunately is going to have some issues becoming GMP compliant. Reason is just simple stuff. They can't bring the building back to reset. So we're not picking on that lovely piece of equipment in the foreground here. What we're actually picking on is the facility around it, oddly enough. So those floors are unsealed, therefore porous, therefore allowing lots of pathogens in them. They cannot be cleaned properly and they can't be reset back to zero. The exact same thing with the ceiling, that's acoustic tile ceiling, completely porous, can't be reset. We've also got panels that are not washdown rated, and of course a bunch of plugs that look like not washdown rated either. These are kind of simple things a lot of people don't think about is if I need to take a room and bring it back to a complete cleanliness standard, which GMP requires, you're going to actually have to have that ability within that design. Otherwise, you're just not going to get it. Considerations, I think we can kind of just go through this pretty quickly. This is a little bit long list because I know we have interest of time. We want to get some questions here. Generally, discovery analysis is pretty straightforward. Basically, people are obviously evaluating the project's viability, developing the actual process train itself, the budget, all certification, all of that. Looking at your certification required at the end, GMP, GMPU, ISO 9000, et cetera. This is just the standard process that most facilities go through is what we're going through here. Process train design is obviously laying out the entire equipment to the exact specifications of the manufacturer, including all of the actual associated components that are normally not thought of, which tend to be like packaging components, process chillers that are feeding equipment, process boilers, process compressors, not just the extraction skid itself, but all of the associated components that have to be thought of and located somewhere. And the big one is hazardous materials usage and utilities. Obviously, you have to find some way of dealing with all the hazardous materials you have on the site, where are they stored, how are they stored, how are they moving, where are they moving to, and of course, finding where they're being potentially destroyed if they are being destroyed. And then we have standard operating procedures, the SOPs and compliance. That's really where you have a team, technical writers, hopefully writing the SOPs on how you're going to go through this process in great detail, hopefully not missing, of course, anything. And yes, then finally you have extraction, product manufacturing, compliance of all the components going in, final plan review, and obviously looking towards your compliance with the International Fire Code and Building Code. Do you guys want to add something to this list? I'm not going to ram through a little quick because I'm trying to get to the question and answer section to make sure we have 10 minutes for that.
No, let's just keep on trucking along.
Oh, okay. Successful process facilities, obviously a lot of elements they have are very similar to some of the negatives that we heard earlier, just in reverse. Having obviously a good process trained engineering team, pretty straightforward. Identifying all the major components before starting design, that's actually kind of a godsend right there. Having an architectural and engineering group who's got some experience. Presenting the plan early to the authority having jurisdiction. I'm going to call these pre-planning meetings. These are great meetings, even though they kind of cost, well, can cost $1,000 or whatever. You end up sitting down with a person who's inevitably going to actually give you the okay. They get to look at your plan, pick holes in it, and tell you what they'd like you to do before you spend a bunch of money developing a set. It can be really beneficial. Obviously, estimating your cost. We have a lot of projects that don't realize that they're designing a $20 million building until it actually ends up coming in from the contractor quotes. So it's really good to have a cost estimating company before you go too far down the rabbit hole to understand that you are going to be spending X dollars, and of course ensuring that you have that much money, of course, set up. Filing the set for plans review, obviously submitting it to a quote for the contractor at the same time. That's really a good move. While they're reviewing your set, your contractor is able to give you quotes on the facility and potentially maybe even recommend ways to make it slightly cheaper in the design methodologies. Number 9 is obviously hiring the contractor. And number 10, of course, is complete commissioning of all components before your trial run. Always, always, always have the commissioning package paid for through the manufacturer. If there is an option to do that, we always recommend to do that. Have their staff there. So when the components, are being commissioned, you've got the technical knowledge present to ensure that they can be troubleshooted appropriately. And of course, they're going to function when they actually turn on, because they don't normally function when they first turn on. That's a common misconception. All right, moving forward, obviously we have the design and extraction train should, of course, have your process train at the end concept in the beginning. So equipment selection, it really should be picked, based upon your final production goals. This is kind of a bit of a no-brainer, but most people know that depending upon what products they want to make, they should really be selecting anything based upon that. And then one recommendation that we've had before is any extras or add-ons or special items that makes the process more complicated should probably be avoided in the beginning until you have the process fully identified. Those items could add too much complexity and also can make it so that the process itself may be non-functional, which we've talked about before as well. And here's the Kaplan machine calculator. That's pretty cool. Let you guys go talk a little bit about what this means.
Yeah, so I mean, and kind of going back to the previous slide is choosing equipment, right? So most extraction technology manufacturers will be able to provide you with a layout, with a PID, and walk you through, what is it that you're going to ultimately need. Internally, what we've done is we've built ourselves this calculator here, basically encompassing every single system that we manufacture, also some of the components that we distribute, like distillation technologies there. And this is a really quick tool here to where we can identify how many machines or how many different components we're going to need to stay with like a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So let's just say we have an extraction machine that's an Atlas. Well, that's going to produce X amount of solution per hour. Well, how much evaporation technology are you going to need? How many systems for that? Also, ethanol recovery from the biomass, which is centrifugal systems. And so when you put in all of this information into this calculator, you'll be able to design a 1-to-1 process for you without any bottlenecking. And we'll also be able to determine exactly what your ROI on that is going to be if you're running at different efficiencies in your lab. So let's just say, you're just starting out, your guys are, or your staffing is, still kind of in a training process. They're getting familiar with the equipment. We'll assume that that's going to be a 70% efficiency. And then by punching in numbers into, where does it say here?
With market value, depending on
the market value, yeah. So the input market value. So let's say we understand that in your region, distillate, PDD or THC distillate, whatever that may be, it's selling for $5,000 per kilo, which is $5 a gram. You will be able to determine the profit, how many extraction days you're going to have to run all of this equipment that's encompassed here to get your money back. invoice. So this is an internal tool that we use to make sure that all of our communications to the customer base is always congruent, always the same and repeatable.
Excellent. I also like the ROI calculator in the corner there. I think a lot of people would be intrigued by that portion. Is that based on, I'm assuming, California current crude prices?
Correct. Not crude prices, distillate prices.
I mean, you can modify depending on what path you want to go. This particular setup here was to go to distillate. If you're going into crude, all you do is just, you have to do like $2,000 and they'll give you whatever that price is going to be for the crude side. Typically what we've seen, based off of the background of the calculations here, the price per liter is like broken up in thirds. 1/3 is the biomass, 1/3 is probably your overhead, and another third is your profit. And that's how we do the calculation based off of the total machine price, how many extraction days you're going to need, and that's where your ROI days come into play.
Yeah. I think it's extremely beneficial for a lot of people coming into the market to actually see a true cost for the entire process, or at least a good approximation of it, along with an ROI calculator. You don't normally see the ROI calculator.
Yeah.
And then do you have another list for some of the support components, or is this an actual full process train, including grinding equipment and all that stuff?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. So this covers all of the equipment that we manufacture and we sell.
Yeah.
And
got it. Okay.
Ancillary processes like the preparation of the material, this and that. What we can do is we can help the customer to understand that, but we've never really built one out here for us because usually these processes will vary, and so it's more of an individual basis when we're talking about the whole entire process setup for a customer.
But as you mentioned, I mean,
normally it's the entire equipment list. Yeah.
Right. This is an evolving document, so it's ever changing. Now that we're getting customers that want us to help from the cultivation side all the way down to packaging. I mean, we could build calculators such as this to really give an individual one holistic cost. Like I mentioned before, it's having one channel of communication where you come to Kapna, you come to us, and we're going to look at helping through, seed genetics, depending what autoflower you want. If you want a cherry wine type strain, all the way down to if you're going to put this in a vape into an edible, if you're going to go into some sort of, tincture or cosmetic world, we can assist you, through that whole process. And that's where this calculator helps bridge some of the costing, because obviously you have to go back to your investors and beg or ask for money. And having ROIs to know when you're going to get your return on investment is key.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest questions. People come in, they're like, all right, when am I going to make my money back? So out of that, we built this so we can just do it immediately and show them, all right, this is what your initial investment is going to be. It's going to take you 10.5 days to make that money back. And so there you have it.
Excellent. Well, in the interest of time, I think we need to basically probably fold it up here and move on to the question and answer period, because unfortunately we only got a couple of minutes for that. Let's see if we can move on to, there's some larger slides that we still had as well. We just didn't really get to some you probably saw that larger ethanol extraction train concepts, documentation, of course, requirements, all that fun stuff, which of course, documentation. I do love the one, if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. That is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
The best thing about GMP is that you got to have the documentation when it's actually occurring. If someone's actually doing, testing and balancing report on your airflow system for you to get, ISO level 8 clean room, obviously that report should be actually filed right then, the minute they're actually done with the report, versus at an unknown time at a later date when you might have lost the paperwork. GMP items, obviously we covered most of these items. So yeah, let's go on to the question and answer portion of the presentation and see if we have some questions coming in from the online community.
Now, Dan, do you see the questions on your end?
I do see 15, if I'm not mistaken. You want to start at the top here?
From Kathy Knutson, is that what it is?
Kathy Knutson. I can answer this one pretty quickly. GMP, there's a couple different entities, two in particular. One is Orion GMP, great group, pretty overloaded with hemp stuff, but they are fantastic. There is also the CGS, I believe, the largest GMP entity in existence. If you actually just Google GMP certification, I believe you will find them right away. And David, I want to say, I forgot his last name. He's fantastic with their group. He kind of leads their Cannabis and Hemp GMP team. Copies of the PowerPoint, don't actually know. I think Chris can probably.
Yeah, I think Chris is already back into the group and just added the YouTube link is going to be sent.
Yeah, we can send out the YouTube link and the slides as well after the webinar.
Oh, excellent. There's a lot of questions about that. Mm-hmm. Is there any college in North America that focus on extraction topics? Oh, Darwin was just telling me about this. Not right now, but it will be really soon. There's let's see, the terpenes and testing kind of community kind of leads this a lot. They are attempting to set up some method of actually having a college that actually will cover these topics. But to my current knowledge, I don't know if they have one.
So there is no college per se, but there are private companies. There's one here in California. Oh, I can't recall off the top of my head, but what they do is they host like crash courses, right? So it's like you could sign up for like a 3-day event, or you can sign up for it's like a 2-week thing where they'll cover all of the bases from extraction all the way down to distillation, and kind of give you like, this kind of private certificate that you've completed a course.
Yeah, John McKay does that. It's like the CBD crash course, something or other. I know he does that, and there's a couple other teachers too.
A quick Google search will probably help you to find where they are. I'm sure they're having.
But there is an official one coming soon. I think the question they're asking is there's more of like, is there an official course study? And the answer is no. It seems like most extractions need to be a combination of mechanical engineering and chemistry. So I think a lot of people actually who have a background or have gotten into the sector and tend to have a mechanical engineering background, and then there's some chemistry add-ons.
I would say that
not everyone's a PhD, of course.
Most extraction companies or the extraction manufacturers, extraction technology manufacturers will provide training. I mean, we most certainly do that. We provide either an in-house training or an on-site training. It could be as long as the customer desires. Usually it's no more than 3 days. In our past experience, I think 3 days is just more than enough to get everybody in the facility comfortable, or at least the floor leads comfortable with all of the equipment. The equipment is usually designed to be either automatic or semi-automatic. The operators just basically have to fill it with material and then press a button to go. Everything else, the distillation stuff, it's also relatively easy to train somebody. So people shouldn't look at this, our listeners shouldn't look at, extraction and distillation as something that they're going to need a PhD to run for them, because all of these machines will come with a substantial amount of training and a substantial amount of support on the back end. So, if you run into problems, if you're having yield issues or something like that, most companies will have a tech support department that will be able to hold your hand through pretty much anything until you're fully comfortable. And this has been our experience for the past several years. We don't have too many with customers not being able to operate the machinery the way they're supposed to.
But also too, one thing I want to chime in is that, within the next 90 days, CAPNA will be doing like a college, like a CAPNA University.
We're also building that out right now. Exactly. So we will be doing also like certification courses, so if somebody can come in, fully understand what our technology does, how to operate these machines to their maximum efficiencies, and then we'll give you also a certificate of compliance, not compliance, what's the word I'm looking for? Of completion. Certificate of completion.
And it's only hemp, guys. Just want to make sure it's not cannabis. It's solely just for hemp products that we're going to be doing a lot of the testing internally and training on.
That's for our BCC compliance regulation here. So we're going to be running hemp in the facility, which allows us to mitigate the whole BCC regulation of not having a cannabis license. So, but that's a completely different story. So,
yeah. Also, someone's looking, they want to have an access to your calculator, which I'm pretty sure is not available to public, but it sounds like someone would like to get a hold of that.
We could provide it by email or a screen share. Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, we could do like a screen share for sure.
So we can I just type in systems. So if you just send us an email request there, we'll be able to provide you.
No, excellent. I see that. And someone else actually says small product formulation lab for wholesale and retail in regards to planning for GMP and long term. That's an interesting question. Well, I would definitely say that if you're going to start at the beginning, contact a GMP auditing entity in the very beginning. The best thing you can do is actually contact SGS or Orion before you design anything. So don't even bother designing. Contact them, and then they'll be able to say, oh, great, you're planning on doing X, Y, and Z, and you have this kind of a product being sold, or products most of the time. And then from there, they'll be able to actually work backwards. So it's kind of a strange way of working, but you got to look at the very end of the process, what you're selling and who you're selling it to, and what their certification and requirements might be, and then work backwards on designing the actual facility appropriate to that kind of requirement. We work with both those entities many times. They're great. But if you're really looking at going after a GMP, it's actually very important to start with an auditor in the beginning so that you don't run afoul of some of the mistakes that a lot of people do.
Got it.
Okay. Oh, someone wants to know more about information on your certification program.
That
can't tell if Sharon is asking about.
Chris at Kaplan Systems, it's not the proper email. Chris.salinas@kaplansystems would be where you would go for the calculator and any information that you'd like to receive about our certification.